On December 24th, 1971, Christmas Eve, Juliane Koepcke, a 17-year-old girl, boarded a flight across Peru to visit her father. She had no idea that her life was about to change forever. Midway through the flight, lightning struck the plane. It broke apart in midair and crashed into the Amazon rainforest. Juliane fell nearly 10,000 feet and survived. She woke up alone, injured, and deep inside the jungle. With broken bones, no supplies, and no clear path to safety, could she make it out alive? This is the true story of Juliane Koepcke, the girl who fell from the sky. It was December 24th, 1971, Christmas Eve. Juliane has just graduated from high school and was flying on seat 19OI with her mother, Maria, from Lima to the city of Pucallpa in South America, where her father worked as a zoologist. Juliane's family lived at a research station, deep in the Amazon rainforest called Panguana. They were on Lancer Flight 508, operated by a small Peruvian airline. The airline had a troubling safety record with many previous incidents. There were 92 people on board on this flight. The flight started smoothly, and there were no indications of any storms ahead. But about halfway through the journey, the sky began to change. The flight was over Amazon forest in Peru, when a storm with dark clouds formed around the aircraft. Lots of turbulence shook the cabin and lightning lit up the windows. Bags fall from the overhead compartments. Gifts fly through the air. People scream. Suddenly a powerful bolt of lightning struck the plane's right wing. The fuel tank ignited instantly, leading to a blast. Within moments, the aircraft was nose-diving straight to the ground. As Juliane wrote, suddenly the noise stops. She was outside the plane. She was in free fall, strapped to her seat, and she could see the jungle spinning toward her. She was falling from nearly 10,000 feet, over 3 kilometers above the ground, still buckled into a row of 3 seats, spinning through the air. She was spinning like a spinner, which made her unconscious. She crashed into dense woods. Experts believe the row of seats may have acted like a crude parachute, slowing her descent just enough. She also landed in thick foliage, a dense layer of branches and vines that cushioned the impact. Against every possible odds, Juliane survived the fall from the sky. Juliane lay unconscious on the jungle floor for nearly 24 hours. When she woke up, she found herself behind a 3-seat set. Later, she remembered that she possibly unstrapped herself and crawled there. Surrounded by fragments of the plane, she realized the crash had truly happened, and she was alive. She looked at her wristwatch, which was still ticking. It read 9 p.m., a small but grounding detail in the chaos around her. She had survived a fall from nearly 10,000 feet, but everything hurt. Her right eye was swollen shut. Her collarbone was broken. She had deep cuts across her legs and arms. Fueled by shock and adrenaline, she was able to stand limp and begin to move. Her first thought was of her mother. They had been sitting together on the plane. She called out again and again, but there was no answer. Juliane was alone, truly alone, in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. But the crash was only the beginning. In front of her lay an endless green maze of thick trees, poisonous insects, and unknown predators. She was injured, frightened, and barefoot. The question now was, could she survive the jungle? Juliane Koepcke was born in Lima, Peru in 1954. Her parents, Hans Wilhelm and Maria Koepcke, were German scientists, a zoologist and an ornithologist who had moved to Peru to study wildlife in one of the most biodiverse regions on Earth. Juliane spent much of her early life surrounded by books and animals, but her education was far from typical. She attended a German Peruvian school in Lima, where she studied science, literature, and languages. But the most important lessons she learned came from outside the classroom. When Juliane was 14, her parents moved their family to a remote area of the Amazon rainforest to establish a biological research station called Panguana. There she lived with them in basic wooden huts surrounded by dense jungle. She was the only child for miles. Under her parents' guidance, she learned how to survive in the rainforest. They taught her how to spot venomous snakes, identify edible plants, and avoid the dangers of insects and animals. She knew how to follow a stream to find larger rivers, and how rivers could lead to people. She slept in huts with no walls, lived among monkeys and snakes, and helped her parents in their field research. She knew how to stay calm around spiders, and how to walk carefully through thick underbrush without panicking. What seemed like an unusual childhood would soon become her greatest advantage. When the crash happened, Juliane wasn't just a scared teenager, she was someone who understood the jungle, and she knew how to stay alive on Earth. She had survived the crash, but now she had to survive the jungle. Her collarbone was broken, her right eye was swollen shut. She was wearing only a sleeveless mini dress and one sandal. At first, she stayed near the crash site, calling out for her mother, but the only reply was the endless buzzing of insects. She found a small bag of candy that had fallen from the wreckage. It was all she had to eat. She rationed the candies carefully. Then she remembered what her parents had taught her. Follow the water. She searched the debris field until she found a shallow creek. She knew creeks led to streams, and streams to rivers, and rivers to people. So she began walking, slowly, limping, wading through water. Her glasses were gone, so the world was a blur. She had to feel her way forward, each step guided by instinct and memory. The days were brutally hot. The nights were worse. She had no fire, no blanket, no roof over her head, just wet clothes and the sound of animals. At night, the jungle comes alive, she would later say. The calls of monkeys, the shrieks of birds, and the rustling of leaves made her feel like prey. She followed the small water stream for days in hope that it would lead to a river. The stream started getting wider as she moved ahead. On the third day of her trek, she found a large piece of wreckage in a stream bed, a turbine blackened and burnt on one side. She realized this might have been the spot where the lightning struck. On the fourth day, she heard something above, the low rumble of a plane. She looked up through the trees. A rescue plane was circling overhead. She waved, screamed, and tried to signal for help, but the canopy was too thick. They couldn't see her. Later, that same day, as she continued along the stream, she came across something horrifying. A row of 3 passenger seats, still intact, with the bodies of the passengers strapped to them. Their heads were buried deep into the forest floor. One of the women had blonde hair. For a moment, Juliane feared it was her mother, but as she got closer, she realized it wasn't. During the nights, she cried herself to sleep more than once. Her wounds grew worse. Flies laid eggs in the gash on her arm. Maggots soon crawled beneath her skin. She tried to stay calm. She remembered her father once treating an infected dog using kerosene. But for now, there was nothing she could do. She walked for days, staying near the stream. Sometimes she floated in the water to rest, letting the current carry her slowly forward. But she didn't stop. She kept walking. By day 7, she was hallucinating. She began to hear her mother's voice calling to her. She knew it wasn't real, but it pushed her forward. Then, on the 9th day, she saw something strange by the riverbank. A small boat, tied up near a wooden shelter. She thought it might be a mirage, but as she got closer, it was real. She noticed a trail of footprints in the mud beside the boat. Summoning every last bit of energy, she followed the trail. It led her to a tambo, a simple wooden hut used by forest workers. It was empty. Inside, she found a can of gasoline. She remembered what her father had once done. With trembling hands, she poured it over the wound on her arm. The pain was indescribable, like fire crawling under her skin. But it worked. The maggots squirmed out and dropped to the ground. She counted nearly 30 that she managed to remove, but many were still deep inside. That night, she slept in the shelter. It was the first real roof she'd seen in over a week. The next morning, the 10th day, she heard voices outside. 3 local loggers had arrived by boat. They were stunned to find a girl alone in the jungle, injured, weak, and barely able to stand. But Juliane spoke Spanish, the local language, and that changed everything. She was able to explain who she was, what had happened, and how long she had been walking. They believed her. After 10 days lost in the jungle, Juliane Koepcke had made it out alive. The 3 loggers who found her quickly paddled their canoe downriver, deep into the remote Peruvian rainforest, until they reached a small village. From there, word travelled fast. A girl had been found, a girl who had fallen from the sky. Juliane was taken by plane to a hospital in Pucallpa, the very city she and her mother were flying toward. She was malnourished, covered in insect bites, her wounds still healing, but she was alive. Within hours, her father, zoologist Hans Wilhelm Koepcke, arrived at her bedside. He had been waiting in Pucallpa, frantic and devastated, ever since the crash had been reported. For 10 days, he feared the worst. Now he was looking into the eyes of his daughter, bruised, broken, but alive. Juliane told authorities what she remembered: the route the plane was flying, the time it went down, and where she thought the wreckage might be. Her survival gave investigators a critical lead. Search teams were dispatched into the jungle. Using Juliane's clues and trajectory estimates, they located the crash site a few days later. It was devastating. Bodies were scattered across the forest, some still strapped to their seats. Among them was Juliane's mother, Maria. She had survived the initial crash, Juliane would later learn, but died several days later from her injuries. She had been just meters away from Juliane's resting spot, but hidden by thick undergrowth. For Juliane, it was a second heartbreak. She had held on to hope for 10 days. Now, she was the only one left. Out of 92 passengers and crew aboard Lanza Flight 508, 91 had died. Juliane Koepcke, a teenager who had fallen 10,000 feet into the rainforest, had survived against every odd. And now, the world would soon learn her story. Books were written, documentaries aired. She went on to live a quiet life as a biologist, but those 10 days alone in the Amazon never left her. Yet Juliane's story is only one chapter in the greater saga of human endurance. Because next time, we leave the jungle behind and sail into a frozen nightmare. An expedition trapped at the bottom of the earth, a ship swallowed by ice, temperatures colder than Mars, and a leader, Ernest Shackleton, whose journey would rival Homer's Odysseus. It wasn't just survival, it was legend. Subscribe now, and don't miss the next episode, Shackleton's Antarctic Expedition, the greatest survival story ever told.